Hello and welcome to Anti-Sceptic. I'm Kelsey De Almeida, stand-up comedian, Christian, and now podcaster. In this show, we'll be discussing all the interesting and sometimes slightly weird things people believe in. From Bee Venom Therapy and flat earthers to asking the big questions like, can we really contact the dead? Join me where in each episode I'll be chatting to an expert or a funny guest discussing a belief that's close to their heart. So, let's introduce today's guest. Today's guest is Laura, also known as the Honey Huntress. Laura is a beekeeper who lives and breathes bees. From collecting their honey to stinging herself, there are many ways in which bees affect her life for the positive. In this episode, we talk about why bees are essential to the planet's survival, why you shouldn't buy store-bought honey, and the practice of Apitherapy, otherwise known as Bee Venom Therapy, an ancient practice believing bee stings can have medical advantages to the human body, including curing diseases. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Podcorn for sponsoring this episode. Podcorn is a marketplace that connects podcasters like me to brilliant sponsorship opportunities such as host read ads, interview segments, topical discussions, and more. With Podcorn, there's no middleman. Podcasters of all sizes can search and choose opportunities on the platform, set their own rates, and collaborate with brands directly without any exclusivities. You never give up any rights to your podcast, and Podcorn is there to support you at every step and ensure you're protected and compensated for the work that you do for brands. The marketplace mission is to give podcasters transparency, creative freedom, and full control of how and when we monetize. There's a link in my show notes to sign up to Podcorn and start browsing sponsorship opportunities. It's now time to jump straight into this episode with Laura the Honey Huntress. Laura, hello and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Kelsey, for having me here. I'm super stoked.
Yeah, thanks for finally joining. We've had so many tech issues, and then me, because you're in Hawaii, aren't you? Now, I focus so much on the time difference when I do guests and stuff, and I was like, okay, midday here is 3 p.m. there. So I was like, let's meet at 3 p.m. your time. And then I was sitting here midday my time going, where the hell is she? 20 minutes went by, 25 minutes. I was like, what the hell's going on? And then I Googled, you're like 19 hours, it's a whole day, like
You're
difference.
in the future.
Yeah, I'm in the future. I had no idea. I was just sitting here waiting in some sort of Matrix universe.
That's
What
right.
an idiot. And I also wasn't sure whether to, because you are in Hawaii, everyone says aloha, right?
Exactly. Aloha. That's the greeting and the departure here.
And is it common vernacular over there? It's not just something that we think you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I know tourists, it takes them a while to feel like they can say it. And people feel like, tourist staff just say it to tourists to play up that kind of Hollywood image of Hawaii. But I mean, I live in a super local community. I answer my phone aloha. Like, I've lived back on the mainland USA, and it's so hard to turn that off because it really does become part of your everyday vocabulary here.
Yeah, because I was wondering if I should start this by saying aloha, but I wasn't sure if that was like you said, culturally insensitive. Also, someone with this accent saying aloha, it's kind of like when British people try and pronounce foreign dishes in restaurants. Like, I'll never forget the time one of my friends, we were in a restaurant, he tried to order gnocchi, and I nearly had to end my own life. I was that embarrassed. Let's get down to business. We're here to talk about bees, right? Now, bees are something I've been fascinated with ever since school, because I remember there's this kind of, and people probably would have seen it on the internet, there's this thing of a quote that gets banded about quite a lot: no more bees, no more us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I remember being kind of confused. I talked to my teacher about it at the time, and she explained that, the bees help pollinate the earth, and without them, we would all die. Now, through the research I did, I found out the bee population generally has died about 90 to 95%, which is crazy. So I just wanted to hear from an expert's view. I guess tell us a bit about yourself, because you're a beekeeper, right? So all day must be just bee heavy for you, right?
From morning till night, all I do is think about honeybees. But really, there's not much. Yeah, that's pretty much the truth. I fell deeply in love with them in 2013. I was working on a farm here in Hawaii, and actually, the story goes that I was really afraid. I was weeding these beds, these gardens, and there were big flower bushes in the vegetable gardens, and there were all these honeybees on the flowers. And as I came here from like a big city, I came from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is a big city in the United States, and I thought I was like a hippie nature girl, but when I was around all that buzzing bee activity, like I was like, oh my gosh, I can't weed the garden over here because there are too many bees. And my coworkers were like, Laura, those bees are busy. Like they don't care about you. You just work around them and you're both working, and there can be harmony with that. And it took me a while, but once I kind of clicked into like, wait, honeybees aren't aggressive by nature. They're super sweet. They're really busy, right? Busy as a bee, that's where that comes from. And they're so preoccupied with pollinating and doing what they're supposed to be doing that unless you accidentally step on one or swat one, they're really not trying to sting you. They lose their life if they do. So it's not in like their top things to do today, like, yeah, let's go sting a human. They're
Mm.
like, nah, I want to live today. I think I'll just pollinate some flowers.
Can I stop you there? Do the bees know that if they sting, it'll end their life? Do we know yet if they know that?
I don't know if they know that on like a super conscious level. I think maybe instinctually they might
Okay.
know that. You know what? It's so funny. I'm getting stung up by a mosquito right now, and it's hilarious that we're talking because I can be stung by like a dozen bees and hardly react, and one mosquito starts to sting me and I just like turn into like this crazy person. I hate mosquito bites, yet I can handle bee stings. So it's a funny paradox there.
Yeah, well, my thing is not so much mosquito bites. It's that thing of like, when you're lying in bed and it's like all pitch black dark and all you hear just fly past your ear is zzz, like that, and I'm like, great, now
Exactly.
I'm up all night trying to find this fucker. So what is it that bees actually do to help the planet specifically?
Well, we've been nailing it on the head here as far as pollination goes. That's definitely their main role. Honeybees are the most effective pollinators. So pollination happens through a lot of things, through just the air that blows pollen from plant to plant, from mammals that brush up against different plants, even humans. We're technically pollinators, but we're not very effective. We're not very efficient with it. And other insects, all insects and flying creatures, birds, bats, are all pollinators. Anything that can help move pollen from one plant to another. So that is creating food, and not just food for humans, food for cattle. So even meat eaters depend on bees. Even if you've never eaten a piece of fruit or veg in your life, and you're just like hardcore meat and potatoes, like nothing green on my plate, your plate still depends on the bees. That was actually kind of fun fact as to why bees were brought to Hawaii. Hawaii, when it was starting to be populated.
You really are all about the bees.
That's all I can think about. It's like it's obligatory for me to hit every bee pun. So when populated and pollinated, I'm not using the right English words there. Anyway, they brought bees to Hawaii specifically for the cattle industry to pollinate the trees that they brought over that made bean pods for the cattle food. And they brought all these cows, brought all these trees to feed the cows, and then the trees weren't producing anything. So they had to bring bees over, but this was like mid 1800s, and they couldn't, it wasn't like a overnight flight. It was a long trip across the ocean in a boat. So they had to put out a reward because all the sailors that attempted to bring over a live hive failed. All the bees would die on the journey. And so they put out a reward for like $10. So big, big money, And that $10 reward got a sailor to figure out a way to bring the bees over here to Hawaii. And now they are a integral part of our ecosystem, even though they're not native. And same thing with all over the world. Bees are on every continent except for Antarctica. And so they pollinate everywhere. And if they weren't there, like you mentioned with your quote, sometimes the quote is cited to Albert Einstein of, if bees disappear, humans have 4 years. And there's not hard science behind that, but there's hard assumption behind that, where if nothing's getting pollinated, then there's not going to be food. So from the smallest mouse to the biggest mammal, we would start to decline. So yeah, long answer to your question there.
No, it was perfect. It's quite a scary thought, really. But I was just thinking, when we say the term bee, I feel like everyone's going to have a different image that pops into their head, right? So what is the difference, for example, between like a bee and a wasp? Because I feel like if you were to ask me, someone who doesn't know very much about all this stuff, they seem to sort of do the same thing. But I feel like a wasp is kind of like the bee's aggressive cousin that's just come out of prison and looking for a fight. It's that kind of, like you were saying, like bees are kind of nice and gentle, whereas wasps, I feel like, are little pricks, just literally looking for anything to fight for.
Little pricks. You're right on the money with that. Wasps, yellow jackets, hornets, that whole range of insects typically are more aggressive. Not always. Certain wasps, like paper wasps, are rather non-aggressive, but they are. An interesting thing with the honeybee is their stinger is barbed. So when it goes into flesh, it sticks in the flesh because it gets caught. Whereas a hornet or a wasp, their stingers are straight and don't have the barb on it. So they're able to sting multiple times as well. So they're built as a weapon, right? Whereas honeybees, their stinger is for defense. The wasp, their stinger is much more for offense and can be much more on the offense. So they do pollinate. They are still important insects. I would never say kill all the wasps or anything like that, even though they are little pricks. At the end of the day, they're still part of that bigger picture, right? The whole ecosystem, they're playing a role that's still important. So they do pollinate. Their homes are typically paper or mud. Honeybees are the main bees to produce a wax home. So that's kind of cool. And honeybees are the only insects that produce food for humans. So hornets and wasps, there's nothing, unless you're eating their larvae, you're really not getting anything consumable from their hive.
Right. So I guess you can kind of see wasps as almost like the Pepsi Max to Coca-Cola. Sort of like, they're not as good, but it's nice to know they're there as a last resort if everything goes, tits up,
right.
basically.
Exactly.
So why do bees produce honey? Because presumably it's not just to make my oatmeal more tolerable in the morning. Why is it they're doing that?
Well, they got to make their own oatmeal more tolerable in the morning. So that's what they're working on. It's their sugar source. It's their carbohydrate. It's their potatoes, right? So bees forage for basically 4 things. They forage for nectar, which is then turned into honey, which is their carbohydrate. They forage for pollen, which is their protein. And then they also forage for water and tree resin. And that tree resin, they turn into a substance called propolis or propolis. And that propolis can be harvested by beekeepers and made into tinctures or salves and have similar healing benefits for humans. So the bees harvest the tree resin because if a tree is cut wide open, it starts oozing resin to heal that cut and to protect it from disease and pests. So the bees saw the tree do that, and the bees are like, oh, well, we want some of that resin to also protect us from disease and pests. So the propolis in the hive is the immune system of the hive. So we've got the carbohydrates, the protein, the immune system, and then the water. And kind of a cool fact with that is it takes about 8 gallons of water to make 1 gallon of honey. So these little bitches are thirsty, right?
Yeah, wow.
Like they gotta drink that water in order for their systems to turn that nectar into honey. And then to go a step further than that, it takes about 8 pounds of honey to make 1 pound of wax. So 8 gallons water to 1 gallon honey, 8 pounds honey to 1 pound wax. So wax is really, really precious to a hive. It holds the whole thing together. Wax is kind of the skeleton of the hive, the bones. You know, we see beeswax in everything these days. So part of my advocacy always when I get a chance to talk about bees is making sure that whenever you're buying a bee product, whether it's honey or a pollen supplement or beeswax chapstick or soap or something, that you know it's coming from a sustainably harvested source and a beekeeper that is putting the bees first and not taking more from them than what they should, because the bees use all that stuff. And it's really cool that we can too. That's that really amazing harmony between humans and honeybees is we benefit from every single thing in their hive, but it's in sustainably harvesting it that we will benefit from it for a much longer time.
And also, because you can buy honeys with like different tastes, and even just from looking at them, you can see the different colors and consistencies. Now, what is producing that? Is that a different type of bee or a different type of pollen? What's the process there?
Great question. So before I got into beekeeping, I actually worked in the wine industry for like 10 years, and I lived in Brisbane. I got to go on a beautiful wine tour down through like Yarra Valley and Barossa. I made sure to hit some of the most prominent wine valleys in Australia. And I love wine, but you know, with drinking a lot of wine comes a lot of hangovers. And so I've switched from that to, instead of hosting wine tastings, I now host honey tastings. But the cool thing is, it's very similar in that just like wine is different depending on the grape that is processed, honey is different depending on the nectar that is sourced. So you can have a single floral honey. For example, if the bees are living in an almond orchard, during the time that almond orchard is blooming, all that nectar will be just almond nectar. So it's a single floral honey. Now, you know, it takes placement of the hives for that to be specifically harvested as a single floral. So most honey that you see in the markets is going to be a multifloral honey. It may have one type of nectar that's more prominent, but typically store-bought honeys are going to have a variety of different nectars, and farmer market, you know, local honeys are usually multifloral, unless that beekeeper is doing specific placement with his hives to catch single floral nectar flows. Then the other things you can do are infuse the honeys, right? You can infuse it with lavender, you can infuse it with different like cinnamon, things like that. So lots of ways you can play with the composition of honey, but I love tasting single floral honeys or honeys that are predominantly one source of nectar, because it is like that wine tasting where you can really distinguish characteristics specific to that nectar source, and they are so different. I mean, everything from like the lightest crystallized like beautiful clear honey to like deep black like molasses honey, and the flavor profiles and the different tannins and complexities from that. I get super nerdy. I get all my wine words about it. But just same with coffee or same with chocolate. It's going to be specific to the region, specific to the weather, specific to the processing techniques of the winemaker or the beekeeper. So a lot of things come into play when you're seeing those different varietals on the shelf.
And something I really want to talk to you about is apitherapy, which is also known as bee venom therapy. Now, since finding out that this is a thing, I've found it amazing that this is actually allowed to happen to people. And it is quite controversial depending on who you talk to. So would you mind just explaining what apitherapy or bee venom therapy is?
Absolutely. So to touch on the controversial part right off the bat is it is, at least in the United States, it is not recognized as a legal medical practice. However, it's not illegal. So I can have a friend over and sting them, and I'm not doing anything illegal. However, if I market that service and overtly ask for money in exchange for that service and make any claims about the outcome from that service, then I'm in trouble. So as with all alternative medicines, that's kind of the case. Is you can practice, you can give out your herbal tinctures, you can do things like that, but the second anyone has a bad reaction, you'll be held accountable a little bit more. But beyond that, the practice is ancient, and we deal with today's legalities, but bees have been stinging humans since the existence of both. And I think humans recognized a long time ago benefits. I mean, so many of the crazy testimonies that I get to hear about bee venom therapy or bee stings are by accident. One of the women I work with on the island here, she was just getting out of her bee suit, and there was a bee that followed her along and got stuck in her hair, and her boyfriend blew it out of her hair, and the bee came and stung him right on the lip where he had had a scar since childhood. And he always kind of played with it, it was on his bottom lip, and he'd chew on it all the time. And a week later, the scar was gone. And the only thing that was different was that he had gotten stung by the bee there. So bee venom has an incredible ability to break up scar tissue from surgeries, injuries, anything like that. So what is bee venom? It is this poison, but in small doses, it is a medicine, right? There are a lot of things that kind of teeter on that line of either it's going to kill you or it's going to make you better. So that is a lot of the controversy with bee venom therapy, as well as people can have severe allergic reactions and go into anaphylactic shock where they're unable to breathe. But that is quite rare. It's about 1 in 20,000 people. And so a lot of people think they've been stung by a bee once and their whole arm swells up and they think they're severely allergic, when in reality, that type of reaction is thankfully only a moderate reaction. If your throat's not closing up and you're not breaking out in hives everywhere, you're not really severely allergic to bees, which is great news. You don't have to worry about walking around with an EpiPen everywhere, but you always want to be careful, because technically anyone can become allergic to bee stings at any point, even beekeepers. Sometimes people who've been working with bees for years, if they haven't got stung in a while and they get stung randomly, sometimes they have an extreme allergic reaction because their body just has lost that tolerance. So like with any kind of medicine or any substance that we consume, our body can build a tolerance to it. So bee venom therapy is used specifically for a few different things, kind of three different reasons people use bee venom therapy. One is localized, where they will sting an area of pain or injury or scar tissue or maybe a tumor. So if it's a localized issue, the bee venoms and stings will go right to that area. So say you have arthritis in your elbow, you would just sting your elbow. The other way that people use bee venom therapy is like acupuncture. So they're getting stung specifically on acupuncture points along meridians in their bodies that affect certain organs or certain nervous system things. So kind of more of a holistic approach instead of just the localized approach. And then beyond that is also for Lyme's disease and more severe chronic disorders where they sting along the spine. And that stinging is really intense. For Lyme disease, it's about 10 stings along both sides of the spine once every other day. So it is a very intense treatment program, but for most people who have suffered with Lyme disease, they've spent hundreds to thousands of dollars to tens of thousands of dollars on so many other treatments that apitherapy becomes kind of a last resort. But at that point, people are so tired of everything else not working, they're willing to try anything. And the really cool story about Lyme disease is, again, it was an accident. A woman with severe Lyme disease at the end stages of her life, could barely walk anymore, been through every treatment in the book, was out for a walk, shuffling along with her caretaker, arm in arm in Southern California. And they accidentally stumbled on a hive of Africanized bees, which are the aggressive honeybees. And the caretaker dropped her and ran, and she couldn't run, the woman with Lyme disease. So she got hundreds of stings from these bees and somehow survived the attack to then 3 days later start to come out of it and have her symptoms of Lyme disease, like 25 years of Lyme disease, start to disappear. And it was like, wait a minute, what? And so her name is Ellie Lobel, and she is now the voice traveling the world for Lyme disease and bee venom therapy. And her story is just magnificent. And she's completely cured now. She had to continue with sessions for a while. And she's basically made the only known protocol for apitherapy. So Apitherapy has a lot of practitioners, but no real set protocols, except for Lyme disease, where they do these 10 stings about 1 inch out from the spine on both sides. So yeah, so just interesting how this practice is developing and how the science is catching up. Like I said, this is an ancient practice of intuition and relationship between two creatures, the humans and the honeybees. But these days we can now look at this, with science, and bee venom is anti-inflammatory, antibacterial, antiviral, and they're studying all venoms for their anti-cancerous potentials. And, if we can cure cancer with a few bee stings, then that's a lot better than, chemotherapy and tons of drugs and all the other things that people have to go through for that.
Yeah, that story is crazy to sort of listen to. But do you, or does anyone yet know the actual science to why that happened? Why is it? Because for people that don't know, Lyme disease, it's from a tick bite, isn't it? It's from an actual insect. So it's kind of ironic that people are being cured from an insect bite by another insect bite.
I love that.
Yeah. So what do we know yet why they counteract each other?
I probably could not articulate the full science of that as much as it deserves. My understanding is it is building the blood. So, kind of like I talked about, when you sting a localized area, the brain starts to turn off healing to an area that's dealing with chronic pain or chronic disease, because the brain just, if it can't fix it, it just stops trying, and the blood flow stops going to that area. So bee venom activates that blood, right? It like charges it up and inflames it for that moment, so that all the white blood cells come there to lower that inflammation, and it alerts the brain to be like, oh, this elbow that I've been ignoring, that's been in so much pain, it needs more blood flow over there. So I think, for Ellie Lobel and for people with Lyme disease, when they're getting that spinal practice and the bee venom is distributing throughout their entire nervous system, I think it's just kind of reprogramming the brain to be like, hey, the body needs to heal this. Like, let's get the blood flow going. And human beings have an amazing potential to heal ourselves. Sometimes we just need those little bits of plant medicine or bee medicine to kind of trigger the brain to do what it's already meant to do. So that's my summary on that.
Yeah, well, because listening to you talking about it, you kind of can't help but go, well, it shouldn't be people's last resort. People shouldn't have to spend all this money before they come to this
Mm,
method of treating
mhm,
it. But I want to
mhm,
talk about the flip side of using bee venom. There are some people that use bee venom and extract it from bees to use it for beauty products and stuff, or for sort of cosmetic purposes. There was
mhm.
one business I found that were advertising that the bee venom moisturizer plumps the skin, right? But it's not doing that, is it? It's causing an allergic reaction. That's what I've never seen someone get
Yeah.
stung and gone, oh, those swollen lips and blue bruising are really sexy. So what is it? Why are people sort of turning to that? And also only lasts for sort of 12 hours. So why are people, and it's not cheap.
Yeah. I think it's just tricky marketing. It's just clever marketing, I think same thing with royal jelly, which is a substance, a nutritious substance the bees produce with a gland in their mouth that gets fed to the queen bee through her gestation period, through her development. In order to harvest that, you have to pinch the queen cup. So you're killing the bee to get the royal jelly out of the cell, and it's not a lot. So in order to get, a commercial amount, I don't even know. I can't even picture how you would get that much royal jelly. For bee venom, there are like stinging mats where the bees, you can put the mat like by the hive, and it agitates the bees where they all come sting it, and you can collect the venom. I mean, it's not great. You have to agitate the bees, and I think the mat is designed so their stingers don't get stuck. So you're not killing the bees, but it is still a disturbance to them. And like you were going on to there, these products for beauty and things like that, it really is just not effective, and it's just marketing. And I think people and that are looking for those kind of beauty tricks to like beat time, like, come on over to my hive, I'll let the bees sting you in the face all day, that like, people say that, like my beekeeper friends say that it is like Botox getting stung in the face, but I wouldn't think that it would translate to a cream with bee venom in it. Yeah.
But going back to sort of the apitherapy side of it, where do you stand from it? Because it's interesting, because you yourself are a beekeeper. You sort of you raise bees basically, and you nurture them. And we'll talk about how earlier they're so important to the planet. Now, where do you stand on a moral point of view with the fact that apitherapy obviously means a bee has to die for that to happen? So if we're supposed to be protecting the bees, but we're also using it for medicine, where do you stand on that?
Great question. So glad you asked that one. So I personally am not a vegan, though I do really appreciate the practice and the philosophy of not hurting animals, not hurting creatures, and living a life that's more plant-based. I think that that helps bees when you eat a more plant-based diet. And and that was a struggle for me, especially going into this practice, because I do care very much about the bees. And it's like on a heart level, it's not fun. When they sting, it's not like, oh, they're dead. It takes like 30 minutes for them to finally, for their life to pass. So I typically, after I sting someone, I'll put the bee right in the freezer. And that way the bee just kind of freezes instantly, and it's a pretty quick death for the bee. But the way, and a beekeeper friend of mine in Australia, actually, little shout out to my girl Emily, she helps me a lot with different issues with beekeeping. And I brought the matter to her, and she said, well, Laura, a beehive is a super organism. And bees and ants and termites, I think, are some of the only superorganisms in the world, and how they operate is still a mystery to us. Honeybees are one of the most studied insects, and we still don't know everything about them. But because it's a superorganism, I mentioned the propolis is kind of like the immune system. The wax is kind of like the bones or the skeleton. The honey is kind of like the blood of the hive. The bees are the cells, right? So just like a human body regenerates cells every day, a beehive regenerates bees every day. So a queen bee typically lays about 2,000 eggs a day. And a hive naturally loses about 1,000 bees a day. So at the end of the day, there's still about 1,000 bees forward from their natural regeneration process. So if I'm taking, a handful of bees to sting myself or a friend or whatever in a day, that's not really contributing or causing any deterrence to the vitality of the hive, because the hive already is naturally losing about 1,000 bees a day. So those few bees that sacrifice themselves for the sting. The other way I see that is most honeybees don't get to fulfill their life with that. Most bees don't sting in their lifetime. And so to give a bee that chance to sting as their final act, I think is
So
kind of
it sounds like the
cool.
plot to Macbeth.
I mean, it gets a little grungy, a little, yeah. But at the same time, when I practice, I call my practice sacred bee venom therapy, and the people that I have come to experience that with me are meeting the hive. They're seeing and observing the bees. They're making an offering to the hive. They're giving thanks. So it's not just this disconnected exchange. It's a very connected exchange where they get to really feel like it's a gift from the hive instead of just a procedure, instead of something stark and medical. It becomes a gift. And for my people that are terrified and can't imagine being stung by a bee on purpose, it's about mindset. At the end of the day, it's really mindset. You can look at it with fear, or you can look at it with love. And if you look at it with love, then you just are so grateful, and you're just thanking that bee and going, wow, this is such an amazing medicine coming into my body. And you just have to kind of turn off the pain recognition and just think of it as upload, right? Like I'm just uploading this bee medicine, just like the Matrix, right? Like, okay, I now know Kung Fu. I now know bee medicine. And so that's my request to anyone that feels a lot of trigger from us talking about this is if you're feeling fear right now, try to change that fear into love. And it makes the whole process a lot more enjoyable.
You mentioned that you sting yourself, don't you? You actually practice on yourself as well as, like you said, friends or whoever. So walk me through the first time you did that. Did it hurt? What was like your body's reaction to it? Did you have any ailments that needed curing? Did it help? What happened?
Great question. So I naturally was getting stung as a beekeeper. So that's the cool thing as a beekeeper. You just kind of get, apitherapy on the regular. Even with a suit, sometimes they get you right after you take your suit off if they follow you, or if they're really mad, sometimes they're able to get you through the suit. And like I mentioned before, how some people will have their entire limb swell up. That was me. When I started beekeeping, one sting on my finger would have my entire arm like a Popeye arm. Like it would just be so, so swollen. It was my goal to build my tolerance. I had heard about beekeepers that barely flinch to a bee sting, and I thought, I am going to get there. And it took time, and it really just started happening this last year. And so in the last 6 months or so, really, since the pandemic started, I started studying apitherapy a lot more and was able to get my own hive a few months ago. And I got what are called closing tweezers. So they are what they sound like. They close without having to hold them closed. And that was what was recommended to me. I actually went to an acupuncturist on the island who practices first, and she stung me, and I requested to be stung on both sides of my jaw because I have what's called TMJ, so really bad jaw joint from lots of orthodontic work as a kid. So it's inflamed and it cracks and pops and doesn't usually hurt, but it's annoying. And I thought, okay, I'm going to have her sting both sides of my jaw. And it was crazy because all the venom went down into my chin. And if you remember the talk show host, I looked like Jay Leno. I had those big double chin. So I still have TMJ, but I did notice that it really stopped like being an issue for a few days. And with bee venom therapy, sometimes it is a one and done deal where just one sting will alleviate a problem. Most of the time, it is a procession of exponential stings. So I think because my jaw has been an issue for most of my life, I would need to continue to sting that area to get a full effect. And I haven't practiced that on myself yet, but when I do sting myself, I've been practicing on some bigger scars that I have from childhood, looking at how it's breaking up scar tissue. And again, I've been kind of practicing intermittently where I'm not like stinging every single day and really looking for huge testimonies, because I would rather practice on people that need that practice than just use a bunch of bees on myself. But the other cool thing I wanted to mention is the bees are somewhat intuitive as to where to sting me when I'm just working with bees. Like I have really bad shoulders, and the bees always sting my shoulders. Like that's when I'm working in a hive, they just know to sting me there. And I worked bees with a friend this morning, and he said that he had a bee from like 20 feet away. He could see it coming right at him, and it stung him in the eyebrow where he had had a scar since childhood. And that scar cleared up. So I think sometimes bees know better than we do even where the medicine should go. Yeah, so I don't have any serious ailments. It's more just been little things that I've been practicing on. But part of my hope is that because of the bee venom I've taken in my life, that my immune system is much stronger, and that my ability to ward off more potentially serious issues in the future is also stronger, where I like to think that I'm keeping cancer at bay because I am just, like 50% bee venom.
Well, it's interesting that you say that your immune system is better, because I was going to ask you, are there any negative sides to this? Because the purpose of a bee's venom in the first place is to sort of kill predators. So surely injecting that poison in you can't be good for you. The bee's venom, it's meant to kill, isn't it? Or to stun or something like that. Whereas
Right.
a lot of how come there are any positives to a venom, if that makes sense? Because it wasn't built into that bee for anything positive, yet you're saying that it does create that.
Yeah, was it or wasn't it? We could get real, tripped out in our conversation here on whether or not the bees were meant to have that venom for us for medicinal reasons. But you're right. What we understand is that they use it as either a defense or an offense, which is meant to protect and meant to hurt and kill or, deter an enemy. And so the irony that we're able to then benefit from that is pretty special. I think it comes down again to kind of it building the blood, not to go too into our current situation, but kind of the idea of like, if we're wearing a mask everywhere and blocking ourselves from every possible bacteria and virus, then our immune system isn't able to learn how to defend against those bacteria and viruses. So by taking something into our body that, technically negatively affects us, our body then has to build up stronger to contend that, right? So if it's not killing us, it makes us stronger, I guess.
And why is it a bee dies when it stings? Because it's very dramatic. They do like to make us feel guilty as their final moments are there. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
well, okay, that hurt, but I didn't want that to happen to you. Why do they die so quickly?
Well, their stinger is connected to their intestines. So when the stinger, technically it's the stinger and then a venom sac, and that venom sac is connected to their innards. And so when the stinger with the barbs in it gets stuck in the skin, it pulls out their entire innards, basically. They're with very delicate hands. You can remove the stinger. I've even had bees sting me and kind of twist their way out to still get their stinger back with them. So, technically, bees can sting you and still live. I've had it happen, but the stinger can't really have gone all the way in where they're able to still kind of retrieve it back for themselves. So yeah, they lose a lot of their innards, so they're not living after.
So when you're practicing the apitherapy, how long do you actually leave the stinger in if it detaches?
So I'm able to kind of do it in a way that doesn't take out the innards, but it does take out the venom sac. So the bee does still die, but it's the bee's removed. I don't just leave the bee there, but I do leave the stinger in the skin. And we leave the stinger for about 15 minutes. I typically will kind of massage around the area, and it's pretty crazy to watch. If anyone is listening and is on Instagram, my handle is the Honey Huntress, and you can watch videos on my page of the venom sac still pumping venom 10 minutes after the stinger's already been in the skin. So it's a really interesting mechanism of the bee for their stinger to be able to continue to release venom once the bee's not even connected to it anymore.
And you mentioned before about they lay a certain amount of eggs, so the queen bee does. So, you don't really feel like you're taking too much out of the population. But because you are someone so connected to bees, more than your average person, does it ever affect you doing the apitherapy on yourself or others? Do you ever think about it? Or
I would say, especially when I first started practicing and I didn't have practices in place, like when I was learning, and I just kind of let the bees, after I would sting with them, I would just kind of like put them in a plant and then like come back like 20 minutes later and see that they were still like crawling around, like barely living in this plant. And it would be like, oh, they're still alive, but they're dying, So now that I just put them in the freezer right away, it's a little less traumatic. And then the person that receives the sting can put that bee on their altar, or, press it in a book and keep it, or something like that. So
Press it in a
it
book.
becomes, I just totally made that up as I said it. So I
That's
have no idea.
I feel like if I was to meet someone, they went, here's my collection of bees I've killed, and then I've kept a collection of my massacre. I'd be like, do you know what? We shouldn't be friends anymore, John.
Yes, let's maybe not do that. But yeah, I think it makes the experience less traumatic when you can just make it more ceremonial, I think. Yeah.
So do you, on a personal level, do you get any hate from this? Because like you just mentioned, you're on social media and stuff, and social media, I mean, you could be, running a charity for, dying children, and there'll still be someone going, you're evil,
Yeah.
someone out there is going to hate you. So do you get any hate because there are, like you mentioned, vegans and stuff, they have trouble sort of, a life of a bee is not necessarily worth the life of a human, all life is precious. Do you get any hate or from people like that?
I have yet to. I don't doubt that I will. I work
and
with
this is the podcast that's going to make that happen.
Bring it on. And that's fine. I respect and I love it. I think the less people that use bees or bee products, the better, frankly. I think our world is in a state where most people don't have access to sustainably sourced bee resources. So if you don't know where your honey's coming from, where your bee stings are coming from, absolutely don't do it. If you want to be angry and contentious about it, that's fine, but I'm going to agree with you at the end of the day. So you got nothing to fight with me about, I so respect that opinion. I honor that. And since my post, you contacted me, I think almost immediately whenever it was I posted about Apitherapy, and you found it on Instagram. And then like a week later, I had another woman ask me to do another podcast, and locally I've been asked to do a Maui little TV segment about it. So for the moment, I've only gotten a lot of curiosity and interest, and I think because so many people don't know about it yet, it's really just about learning, it's just about education. And if it triggers you and you're going to think that I'm an evil person, I'm open to having a dialogue with, respectful people about it. Absolutely.
I mean, you're right. It's so sort of not talked about, or sort of not very commonly known at the moment. So with that in mind, what is people's first reaction when you tell them that you sting yourself and you sting others on purpose? Is it a good reaction, or are people like, I'm going to keep a wide berth from that lady?
I had a guy tell me a couple days ago, you're my worst nightmare.
Oh, God.
And he looked at me so terrified. It was pretty funny. That was one of the first times I've had someone really look at me like I was like the boogeyman. Most people are curious, or they get really quiet. And I think the ones that get really quiet are just like, I can't even, that doesn't fit in my box. Don't try to put that in my box, they don't want to know about it because it triggers them so much to think about getting stung. I live on a property with about 14 people. And the other thing is people show interest, but then not follow through, right? I get a ton of people that are like, oh, you can sting me. Yeah, that sounds cool. And then I'll be like, cool, I have this day, this day, this day. And then it's just crickets, they never follow up.
You sting them with crickets.
I sting them with crickets. Yeah, yeah. I suppose you can't use other insect references on this specific talk. Yeah, so, but in general, people are really just curious. They've either never heard of it or they've heard of it once and then they have a ton of questions for me. And so I've been getting much better at talking about it. I've been practicing a lot for this podcast.
Speaking of other insects, that's a sort of a good thing to ask you. Why is it that it's just bee venom that has these properties? Because I don't know. I mean, you could prove me wrong. I can't think of any other insect bite or anything like that that actually has any medicinal purposes that are actually beneficial to people. Are there any other insects, or do you know why bees are so specifically good at curing people?
I know that they are studying venom as a whole. So venom from rattlesnakes, venom from spiders, venom from centipedes. I know that venom, just that general substance, is being studied for all of these benefits that we've talked about today, specifically anti-cancer. So I think there are more creatures out there with venom that can be beneficial to humans, but I don't think any other venom is being used in the same therapeutic ways that bee venom is used yet. I think mainly because of accessibility. Honeybees are rather accessible, whereas like finding a rattlesnake and also dosage, right? You're getting like 0.15 milligrams in a bee sting. So like, even though you're letting it sit for 15 minutes and that sac is still pumping, at the end of the sting, you're getting such a small, like, pinhead amount of substance in your body, whereas with a rattlesnake bite, you can't control that quantity as easily. So I think just the accessibility, the ability to control dosage, and the fact that, like, a rattlesnake can bite you multiple times, whereas the bee sting is one and done. So you're not dealing with as volatile of a creature. Yeah, so I think that's why honeybees to me, I really believe in the ancient human and honeybee relationship. I think it is a very special relationship for us to recognize for our existence. And by recognizing that more and understanding those benefits, we'll work harder to protect the bees, and then the bees will work harder to protect us. So it's such a mutually beneficial relationship. And I don't think with any other creature that produces venom, that same symbiosis exists.
And so if there are all these benefits and people are genuinely seeing results, like you said, from Lyme disease and other ailments, you said yourself, you've treated yourself, why is it that doctors in Western medicine aren't using it if these facts are out there?
The unpredictability of it and the inability to put a price tag on it. So a prescription medication, you can kind of say, like, it has a protocol. It has a set scientific understanding of, you take 2 pills a day for 2 weeks of this antibiotic or whatever, you will not have this issue anymore. I think because it's undeterminable with bee venom, at least at this point, in specific protocols like that, that makes it hard to translate to Western medicine. And then, frankly, just some dogma. I think it's, it kind of comes back to big farm versus alternative medicine. They're making a lot of money keeping people sick, if I can say that, and this actually cures people. So if they can make $20,000, $100,000 on Lyme disease treatments that aren't actually working, when someone can buy a hive for $300 and treat themselves within a few months, they lose out on a lot of money from that. So yeah, I think that those are going to be the reasons why they frown at the idea.
And to sort of end this on like a sort of a positive note, apitherapy aside, what can we as individual people, or what does the world need to do to help protect bees and, so that they don't become extinct and we don't have that 4 years timeline that Einstein said?
Yeah. So one of the things I kind of mentioned a little bit is a plant-based diet. Cattle and meat take up a lot of land. That land could be used for habitat and forage for bees. Field of cows is a desert for bees. So when you're switching to a plant-based diet or changing a percentage of your diet to more plant-based, you are supporting more agricultural land for bees, ideally, and specifically if that plant-based diet is organic. By supporting organic and local farmers, you're creating and financially supporting ecosystems that support bees, where pesticides definitely negatively affect the health of hives. So in that line also, if you have your own flower garden or vegetable garden or even grass lawn, I highly encourage to not spray pesticides or chemicals on those plants, because bees will forage through, they don't know that it's been sprayed. Growing organic yourself, supporting organic, supporting your local beekeepers, supporting local legislation for environmental movements that support the bees, and by educating yourself, by listening to incredible podcasts like this one, and by talking with your friends about it too. Like if you love the bees and you see that your friend is buying like a really shitty store-bought honey that's probably made in China and is mainly high fructose corn syrup, say, if you know a beekeeper, say, hey, I've got this beekeeper that sells a $20 quart that's way the hell better than that little teddy bear you got from the grocery store. So yeah, that education goes a long way. So the more we speak up for the bees, the better that they'll be doing.
Now, if people are in Hawaii or ever find themselves in Hawaii, how you run sort of talks and educational visits and stuff, where can we find you? Do you have a website, that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Best place to find me is at www.honeyhuntress.com, or my Instagram handle, which is @thehoneyhuntress. Those are my main two social media platforms, and definitely where you can get in touch with me or find out any of the cool programs I have going on here.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you, Kelsey. Aloha.
Aloha. So that was Laura. Who knew a small bee could be so vital to our survival? I'll now be thinking twice before shooing them away from my picnic over summer. Who am I kidding? I run away screaming like a girl. I'm no danger to them. Thank you very much for listening to this episode. Remember to subscribe to this podcast on your favourite podcast player. That way, you'll never miss an episode as soon as it comes out. You can also follow me on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram to get first notice of future guests and the chance to send in your questions before the next recording. Just search for Kelsey De Almeida on those sites. And if you'd like to support the podcast, you can do that by going to patreon.com/antisceptic, where you can send me a monthly donation to help support the show. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.